Welcome this week to this edition of Trialogues, everybody. We are excited to talk today about the Here at Direct event that I know Rob and Matthew attended. I'm going to just quickly introduce everybody. I'm Lindsay Planetta. I'm a real estate broker from California, and now I am in Texas. So I'm in the midst of getting my license here, and I'm a coach. So I'm going to help try and herd cats here and see if I can manage some of the conversation with these guys. And so I'm going to introduce Rob. He is a managing partner of 7DS Associates. Most of you guys know him through his blog, Notorious Rob. Hey, Rob, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I am good. Good.
Excellent.
And we have today Gaylord DeWalt. Gaylord is president and janitor of Thought Faucet, a strategic content studio based in Burlington, Vermont. Hi, Gaylord.
Hey, how's it going?
I am really good. Good to have you back. And Matthew attended this for the first time here at Direct, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts, Matthew. He is the Director of Interactive Product and Marketing at the Corcoran Group in New York City. Hey, Matthew, how's it going?
Hey, Lindsay. Yeah, so it was a really interesting day. I had never been to one of these events, and I've heard sort of much about them. And I think that historically, they're really, really difficult things to follow along online, especially on Twitter. Like, having attended one now, you really get a much better sense of how sort of rich and deep and complicated some of those conversations that appear that take place here at Direct actually are. For those of you that don't really know what it is, it's essentially a one-day conference where the people on stage aren't industry experts. They aren't thought leaders, vendors, really people in the industry, although they're the most important people in the industry. They're the customers. And the one that was held in Millburn, New Jersey this week consisted of really three panels. There was a buyer panel of actual buyers, either people that had been recently purchased homes, or we're in the buying cycle right now. Then there was a seller panel, and then there was a Gen Y panel. And it was it's sort of like a really, really fascinating thing. It's sort of like exposing the industry bare. It's like sitting in the audience, listening to customers talk about what you do, or the perception of what you think you do. And for me personally, it was really, really interesting to hear what they consider to be completely irrelevant, what they consider to be genuinely helpful, and really what's important to them. So, perhaps I'll start with this, and then we can get into it with Rob and Gaylord. But one of the interesting things for me was how completely irrelevant so many of the industry conversations are to the actual customers. And this is something that we ended up talking about towards the end of the day, is you take something like syndication, for example. That's been a fairly hot-button topic for the last 18 months or so, whether it's data accuracy, whether it's the disintermediation of the brokerage, disintermediate the agent, the role of advertising, this kind of stuff. Especially on the buyer side, it seemed to be completely irrelevant to them, even at the expense of something like data accuracy. They didn't really understand or know that the data was inaccurate. And in many ways, the feedback that they were talking about suggested that they didn't even care, that the user experience was so good that, it allowed them to do the research that they wanted at such a deep and sort of consistent level that when they were ready to reach out to an agent, they felt very sort of equipped to have that conversation almost at the point where they knew more than the agent. So
you think it was research beyond just listings then?
Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, the idea of search being almost exclusively handled inside of syndicators and not necessarily on something like a real estate brokerage site, that seems to be a horse that's sort of long gone, especially for the people that spoke at this conference. And Rob, I know that you you spend a lot of time specifically sort of talking with these guys. What was your perception of what they were talking about specifically about that concept?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would, from what I remember, at least one of the panelists, and I think it was the buyer panel, not the Gen Y panel. I think it was the first buyers panel. I do remember one of the panelists said something about he would go to different websites and find out that the house is not actually for sale. Right? So the data accuracy did come up in that sense. But I think in the overall theme, if you will, was that, they don't care. Right? It doesn't occur to them.
Don't care. It isn't something that was ultimately important for them.
No, not at all.
Within the industry, it's
not at all.
Incredibly important.
Yeah, and in the industry, the complaint that you hear are, realtors will say something like, I have to explain to my client, why the house they fell in love with is actually not available. It hasn't been available for 6 months, something like that. And they feel that it harms them. It feels that, they don't want to deal with the customer's frustration, et cetera. And I totally understand that perspective. But from a consumer standpoint, it isn't as if, all of the surveys that get released, right? And you guys are familiar with them. I can't remember the last one that came out. I think it was sponsored by Redfin, maybe. That said something like Trulia and Zillow are only at 70% data accuracy. But everything I've heard at every event I've been to is not a single customer says, well, I would go to Zillow, except that, they're only 70% accurate. Like, they just have no idea. It's not important to them. And so I would agree with you, 100% there. And adding on to that, the thing that really didn't surprise me, because, obviously I've been involved with Here Direct. I'm the co-founder, although I'm now out. I think I've kind of mentioned that at the start, because I'm pursuing too many other things. And, Brandy Saldivar, who's the president there, and Sue, they've been totally running the ship, awesomely. So I'm out, so I feel like I can talk a little bit more freely about them. But this is the fourth one I've been to. It did not surprise me much at all when, you go and ask questions like, have you ever been to a real estate blog? And not one. Right. Not one has been to one. And the answer was emphatic. It was, at least with these guys, it was no.
No,
like it didn't even occur to them.
Don't really. It wasn't just that it was no. It was no, and I never would.
Right. Right. Why would you even think that I would? No.
Right. It wasn't like, oh, that sounds like an interesting thing. Tell me more about that, Rob.
Right. It's almost like I don't know. You ask them, have you ever tried on women's underwear? So I was like, no. It was really like that. And then the one question that came from the audience about Facebook. And again, the response to that was no. Like, why the hell do you think I would even friend my real estate agent?
The social components, that was something that sort of specifically came up with the Gen Y panel about friending agents and this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was sort of an interesting discussion because obviously all of the people that were interviewed as part of that event valued their privacy pretty much over everything else online. Especially as part of the real estate process. And the idea of being friends with an agent was sort of repellent to them. But the idea of engaging in a community page, like about perhaps where they were moving or about where they currently lived, that seemed to be something sort of a little bit more open to them. But the idea that a lot of them didn't follow brands or, weren't really engaged in any kind of like actual sort of real estate activity within social, and that's I paint that with sort of a very broad brush here. That was Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, whatever platform it might be. The idea of social actually being an integral part of the process was emphatically denied. And by these particular people, and obviously, you were keen to stress at the event, Rob, that it's a qualitative, not necessarily quantitative representation of the audience, because those same questions were sort of leveled at mobile use, for example, and there's a little bit more substantial data to back up actual use of mobile in a way that actually contrasted with some of the anecdotal stuff that came out of the event, I think. But the idea of I was thinking about it afterwards, and one of the things that we talk a lot about, either on this podcast or within the industry or on Twitter or whatever, is the idea of disruption and innovation. And it seems to me, after sort of a day's worth of consumer panels, that the idea, what's been most disruptive in the industry is how technology has increasingly disintermediated customer service from the actual customer. That seems to be the biggest sense of disruption, is that technology has actually fueled a move away from customer service for agents and brokerages. And I'm not sure that, I sort of left that event with a very uncomfortable feeling based on that, because technology was important to customers, but there was a sense that the real estate industry's use of technology had created a barrier between them and the people that they're actually looking to serve. Was that something that you felt as well, Rob?
I definitely want to delve into that, a lot more, because I think the answer is yes. I mean, if you remember, at the wrap-up panel, at the end, at the Gen Y panel, my main takeaway for me, and I have to admit, I'm influenced by the other Here Direct I've been to, right, is that, the focus on technology, focus on information, focus on these types of things is actually hurting. I really believe this. I think it's actually hurting realtors. I really think it's hurting brokers and agents. And what I think the focus needs to be is on delivering just unparalleled service. It's a service business. And I think a lot of the agents that were there, because they came up to me afterwards and talked about it, the comment that I think I got the most was, this is bringing me back to my roots. It's stuff that I knew, but I kind of forgotten. So I'm glad that I'm remembering it's all about the service.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, let's bring Gaylord in here. What is your perception of that kind of perspective where technology is actually removing or disintermediating what's actually essential to the customer and what the customer is actually sort of screaming for?
I think there's a lot of evidence that kind of points in that direction. I mean, to begin with, we're talking about media tools in general, right? And it's the nature of media is to mediate, to be between two entities, right? So the way that we can use these tools is either to reach out and connect more, but I think that we can all take a look at the kind of activity that's frequently done and say, well, it's not actually connecting anything, right? It's not. There's a lot of people out there kind of shouting about their links or doing their whatever, and there's not a lot of actual communication itself happening, like two-way. I'm going to help you solve a problem. You're going to help me solve something, kind of thing. Like that doesn't actually go on. There's a lot of lip service paid to it, but it doesn't sincerely happen. And I think that
Do you think that we're failing to make the connection with these tools in terms of positioning them in such a way that they're facilitating building and enhancing relationships and enhancing the transaction and service? And we focus so much on the tools that's become the focus itself is the tools.
Lindsay, you're so dead on with that. It goes back to some of the stuff I talked about at Retso last year of like listening strategy stuff. It's like it seems like kindergarten stuff, but like, hey, if we actually listen to what people are saying, and that's what I really admire about the Here at Direct model. Though I have yet to make it to one, but what I do admire about it is it's like, we're just going to put a couple people up there and listen to what they have to say. And there's not a lot of that going on in any kind of media tool, really. Like most of it is up. Like even when we do see questions being asked in a media format, 9 times out of 10, it's not a sincere question. It's like, some stupid question that's connected to a link on Mashable. And so it doesn't facilitate actual communication. In the customer service department, in industries outside of real estate, there's lots of conversation about how do we make customer service effective, via social media. And there's a lot of people approaching like, wait, how do we solve these challenges? But those are organizations that truly care about customer service, and they don't just give lip service to it, but they're actually doing stuff about it. So they're out there monitoring channels and listening for not just like their brand name and is someone talking trash about me, but like, are people having problems right now? Like, I don't know, like, I fly JetBlue all the time, right? It's like they're my favorite airline. And since they're human, every now and then they screw up, right? And like, oh no, my bag didn't go, or geez, my flight's gonna be really tight. I don't know what's gonna happen. And I put out a tweet, and not a jerk one, but just like, hey, man, I'm worried about catching my next flight. And I've gotten to the other end, and they've actually taken care of it for me via Twitter, or they'll ask me to pull it offline. And there are specific methodologies that people who actually care about customer service are employing to make good use of social media. And I can't say that I see that a lot in the real estate industry. I can't say that like I can pull up a ton of good examples. I think, obviously, Matthew, I think what you're doing with the Corcoran Group approaches that because you actually get out there and you're listing and you're doing stuff or whatever. But generally speaking, of course, social media and technology is getting in between the customer and the realtor. That's what mediating technologies do. And whether that's good or not, I think so far I'd say, I haven't seen a lot of benefit for either party.
The customer is saying that too. It's like,
right.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But, I mean, here's the thing, guys. Like, I agree with what Gaylord is saying, but I do want to differ in this respect. So, first of all, I agree that as it stands right now, I would say that real estate technology tends to be, distancing, removing the customer service element from the customer, and sort of interposing itself between the agent and the customer. But I think a big part of it is because of the nature of technology. So this is, I guess, how I think about it. You guys know, I don't know, I've been talking about this for years, when I say technology is just an efficiency tool, right? It makes whatever you're doing more efficient. It doesn't make it any better. So just because you have a word processor doesn't make you into William Shakespeare. It just means that you can write whatever you're going to write faster and easier. So when I look at just overall real estate technology, most of what passes for technology in real estate is concerned with marketing and lead gen, right? And I think this was brought out. I can't remember which panel it was. It might have been Gen Y. It might have been the seller panel. But, where we see technology that is geared towards customer service. So, for example, the paperless. So the dot loops, the transaction manager stuff, that's really geared towards providing service. Then I think we hear, even from consumers, say that was useful. I think one of the panelists, Matthew, I can't remember which panel it was, but there was definitely one panelist who said something like, the first time he bought a house, 8 years ago, there was a stack of paper. And then the second time he did it, it was all electronic, and he felt that was really nice. Remember that?
The Gen Y panelist we're talking
about. Okay, right.
And
right?
is really the only exception to this because it's probably the most customer service oriented,
exactly,
most effective change.
Exactly.
Something
I like that. Wait, I want to throw one additional one in there with paperless because I wrote about, because we all talked about this on Twitter a little bit earlier, and I wrote a column about it for Inman. I was saying, hey, what other technologies have actually benefited the consumer? Because I came in on the same thing you guys just did, paperless made life good. One of the Sotheby's social media channels also brought up pictures on websites, and even though we all consider that to be pretty simple and basic right now, but the idea being that it saved people from having to drive to a bunch of houses because they could eliminate just from the picture. So I thought that would since someone actually did approach to, hey, here's something that works. It's like, oh yeah, that helps. It saved a bunch of people having to pay gas to drive around.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point, right? So the way I'm kind of looking at this is as we go forward, right? And I've had conversations like Realtor.com, which is the main flagship sponsor for Here at Direct. What I'm telling those guys is, a lot of times you think about, what technology, what products do you need to do for your customers, and they have to, right? We understand from a business standpoint, you have to keep your customer happy. But another part of it could be that if more of the technology companies in our space, if more of the real estate technology vendors or those folks thought more about what is it that I can do to enhance customer service and started developing tools and products to enhance that, I think we could see the gap close in a fairly quick manner. It's just that at least for the last 10 years, I feel like the emphasis has really been mostly on marketing and lead gen. And I think that's why we're seeing, the impact. And that's, I think, why, Matthew, you were kind of feeling like at the end of it, wow, this technology thing, instead of it helping deepen relationships and helping customer service, it's actually put more of an arm's length between the customer and the agent. That's my theory.
Yeah, that's very true. As a marketer, I mean, the thing that I came away with is that marketers, especially, and obviously the technology and marketing conversations have blurred dramatically over the last 10 years. But as a marketer, it's so easy to use technology, and especially social technology, and to some extent mobile technology, to actually do things that have absolutely no relevance to the customer. And that's a very uncomfortable thing to hear, is that, you start to think, well, how customer service oriented, right? If that's the goal, is like, that's the sort of peak of the brand pyramid, is awesome, spectacular, magical customer service. How much of that really goes on inside of something like Pinterest? Like, really?
Right.
Or Instagram, or even Facebook, or Twitter might be the exception with something like that. But there's so many channels that within the industry are positioned as table stakes that are not customer service oriented, or certainly some of the content propagated and encouraged within the industry to be posted to those channels is not customer service oriented. And I think a sort of reframing of how marketing content is created within the industry might be a good place to start, because I heard it loud and clear from the customer that when the agents actually get involved in working with clients towards a close, the customer service is actually very, very high. That there was a lot of satisfaction when agents were actually able to sort of facilitate exactly how that closing worked. But, the year's worth of process before that was really nothing to do with where a lot of the focus has been, with paperless perhaps being the exception to something like that. But, when I'm thinking about, what the industry talks about, there's so little of it that's customer service oriented, and how to use technology to facilitate that. It's very, very it's very unnerving. And I think a shifting content strategy is ultimately sort of what comes out of that in terms of how to use the platforms. And Gaylord, you and I have been chatting a lot about this, and I think it sort of ended up, like you say, as your blog post. But there's this sort of dreadful efficiency that you talk about, where people are turning the handle on these platforms with absolutely no relevance to the customer, right?
Yeah, well, and it's almost like the tools themselves, in a dreadfully efficient way. Like, we're bringing it all the way back to what Rob was saying about the nature of technology is to increase efficiency. And there's two sides of every equation. Sometimes there are things that are getting cut out in terms of increasing efficiency that make the whole system unstable. And it's not just like a throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of easy way, but sometimes the actual thing you need to survive gets cut out. Like, in a technology sense, it's like the shift from a big screen where you have lots of screen real estate to sprinkle ads and build a business model on, shifting from that to a mobile one where you suddenly don't have there's no more margins to put advertising in, so your business model needs to change. In the publishing industry, they've really experienced that. And when you and Rob were talking about this, what quickly sprang to mind for me is that if all of the technology focus has been on lead gen and sales and those aspects of business and making those more efficient, are they being made dreadfully efficient? Meaning, are they getting so efficient that the life is being sucked out of them? And from what you guys are saying, that from these consumer panels, there's some indication that might be going on. If people are saying, geez, the life is being sucked out of this experience, and we wish there was more of it, and we wish it was a little bit less efficient, basically. So that's I know. I mean, I'm just kind of saying what's happening in my brain as you guys are describing the event. But anyway, what do you got?
I want to mention something that Matthew, you tweeted out. You tweeted something that's about a seller panelist that said, "I knew I was getting visitors from Zillow, but I didn't know what that meant." And what I'm interested in is the fact that it seems as though the technology's there and we're using it, but we're not putting it in any context. So the loss of the services, that we're not positioning any of this information in such a way that it actually means something to them.
Yeah, this is on the seller panel, and there was a seller that was he was very passionate about Syndicator sites. And there was actually a moment where they sort of went along the panelists and said, you know, which sites did you use? And across the board, it was Zillow and Trulia. So the idea that sort of search and syndication is sort of pretty much locked up in the consumer's mind, that seemed to be certainly very apparent with the people that spoke at the event, is that it's sort of a 2-horse race, maybe 2.5-horse race with Realtor.com. But, you know, it seemed to be that the user experience of using those sites was the determining factor, you know, over something like data accuracy, you know, strangely enough. But when they said, you know, I was getting people attending my open houses, and they told me that they'd seen my house on Zillow. I knew that it was great, but I didn't really understand why it was great. So it was almost like there was an opportunity for the agent to actually explain the origin of the customer and perhaps what that meant, either in terms of, like we were talking about on the pre-call, like whether this person would be perceived as a more qualified lead, for example, or whether you can even equate those two things. But you know, from the seller's perspective, he's like, oh well, 100 people saw my listing on Zillow, but I didn't know what that meant. I just knew it was a large number.
And you don't know whether that's like high compared to other listings, low compared to other listings. Yeah, right.
You don't know anything. But the sellers, certainly the sellers and the buyers, were very engaged in running comps on Zillow and Trulia. They were very interested in doing research and had no problem doing any of this stuff on their own time, you know, to understand what their house should be worth. And it was almost nothing to do with something like a Zestimate. You know, it was almost, they were really drilling into, like, recent sales. And even one of the panelists said that he had access to, I think it was like a prior sales database through what he did at work, or, you know, that kind of stuff. And they have no problem actually doing all this stuff on their own to sort of round out their own knowledge. But the idea that they don't understand really what the metrics are, that's an agent-centric education problem, I think. What do you think, Rob? I mean, you were with that panel.
Yeah, there's a couple things I think to point out there. I remember that seller. And if you remember, that seller also was, I think, the least happy person on that panel, because he actually never sold his house. Do you remember that?
Well, he had overpriced it, I think, was the issue.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's what the audience felt, but, you know, he was defending us. It was only $4,000. I was willing to work on it, et cetera.
Right.
So the context of that, you know, I was getting all these, you know, views on Zillow, and I didn't know what it meant. I think it was informed in part by the fact that, and I think he said this, which was, you know, I was getting all these visitors, but no offers. So what did any of that mean, right? So there's part of that. Now, of course, we don't know, because we weren't there for the transaction, right? We don't exactly know. I do 100% agree that there was a service opportunity that was missed. You know, I think missed. We don't know, because the agent might have, you know, spent every other day calling this panelist up and saying, hey, this number but no offer means that you're overpriced, and we need to do this, we need to do that. And maybe the panelist just didn't remember. So we're speculating a little bit there.
Yeah, we're speculating a lot.
But as I'm listening to you guys talk, there's something that to me came out as such a clear example of priorities, if you will, of the way that technology has been implemented throughout real estate. So keep in mind, that as you said, Matthew, the panelists were sort of saying Zillow, Trulia, all over the place, right? And you feel like Zillow and Trulia have pretty much, they've won the war as far as consumers and listing. Right? What occurred to me was 10 years ago. No, it wasn't quite 10. But when the NAR got sued by the DOJ, right, do you guys remember what the issue around that was during the DOJ lawsuit, the antitrust lawsuit?
It predates my time in the industry, so no.
Right. Galen, do you remember at all? Were you around for that?
I wasn't around 10 years ago.
Okay. All right. Then I was kind of in it. I was just starting out my residency career, but I did go back and look at it. The issue that the DOJ sued NAR and MLS, all these brokers around, was VOW, virtual office website. Right. And at the time, what the theory was that there were these internet brokerages, these new companies are coming out, that were going to be able to deliver services, hence the virtual office concept, that they can deliver services that normally people would have to drive into the broker's office. And instead, with this new technology, they could get all of those services delivered to them over a website. As we know...
I remember this, Rob. Now that you're describing this, I might not have been here when that came out. I can't remember.
Right.
But I was definitely working shortly after then because it was a total mess from a technology standpoint.
What's amazing is at the same time that they did the settlement and all of that, like VOW went completely, it doesn't even matter, right? Nobody even uses or thinks about VOW these days. And it went entirely to IDX, right? And you think about IDX, the whole point behind IDX, Internet Data Exchange, is marketing. The entire point behind IDX is to get lead gen and to get new buyer inquiries off of these listings. And what I'm wondering now is what would have happened, right? What would have happened? How different would the industry look if instead of looking at IDX, if the industry as a whole just said, look, the quote IDX stuff, all that consumer-facing lead gen stuff, let the big, if there's like consumer media guys like Trulia and Zillow handle it, we should focus on VOW, right? We should focus on what the DOJ pointed out. The NAR went to bat and did a settlement to make sure that we have this ability is to deliver services over online virtual office websites. Could you imagine how different our world would look like right now if we had 10 years of technology development around virtual offices, delivery of services, right, over online to actual clients as opposed to, all the fight that we've had and all the energy and everything that's been, spent on just doing online lead gen over IDX. I think that to me is such a clear example of where we've been the last 10 years. The result of that is Zillow and Trulia are dominating online search. Buyers, panelists, every single person we've talked to, they don't even think that much about an agent website or broker website, right? And the service delivery and the promise of technology making service delivery more efficient has become, something that, three guys on a podcast have been talking about.
Well, I think one of the things that you're talking about, Rob, which is also something that sort of came out of these panels, is there's actually quite a discrepancy between public-facing services and internal almost one-to-one between the agent and the client tools. There is a discrepancy between those two things where there has been a disproportionate amount of effort and resources devoted towards public-facing things. Search is a great example of this. Video, content, social, mobile, all of those kind of things, they're very public-facing in nature. And you're equating that to lead gen accurately, I think, certainly in terms of vendor use of it and brokerage use of it. And what's happening is that there's perhaps starting to be a shift where what people are actually realizing is that where the real value of technology is how it actually facilitates that privately between the agent and the customer, or perhaps even between the brokerage and the agent. But it's not necessarily a public-facing thing. So it's things like enabling agents to work outside of the office smarter and faster, right? And that would perhaps be like a mobile conversation. It might be something like community groups online, where it's sort of like a closed small group, and that might be a social application, or, being able to use a tablet smarter while you're actually out looking at houses. I know somebody like Christina Wise sort of evangelizes like the Evernote use case for that kind of scenario. And I think that her clients are finding tremendous value in that. But it's a very different type of conversation from, here's a map with thousands of pins on it, and we want you to work as hard as possible to filter down exactly what you want. Like, it's a very different type of conversation. The former actually being predicated on what the customer actually wants and actually removing layers of work for them that they're not interested in sort of getting into. That's where they start to perceive the value of the agent, is how they can put that technology to work for them, right?
I guess it's just interesting because all of this conversation around how technology is supposed to make things easier, I keep seeing all of these tweets. I go through the stream, and it's just people are craving rapport and connection and care and love and all these words, and I'm thinking, gosh, there's a major disconnect somewhere in here because something's failing to happen with all these things that are supposed to make it so much easier and smoother and wonderful for them, and yet all these tweets kind of keep talking about this I felt neglected and no one not listened to. I don't know. What do you think about that,
what's
Gaylord?
happening when you use the word easier, Lindsay? I think it's easier to broadcast your own marketing message. To Rob's earlier point, it's certainly become easier to publicize who you are and to sort of get out there and have a much smoother path to mass distribution. Right. That's definitely technology over the last 10 years has definitely empowered that and made that possible. But where the disconnect comes in is the complete opposite of that, which is more at the nano level between the agent and the customer, the one-on-one private level, and that seems to have been disintermediated by the technology. And they said, well, what I really need is somebody to explain this to me, and the solution, as I said before, is not, here's a Pinterest board of what the difference is between a condo and a co-op. Like they want like a conversation, or they want technology to sort of facilitate that information exchange, as opposed to something platform specific or something like that. It's a very different type of conversation, I think, and one in which the customer actually has to work less. They feel like the feedback that they have to give us is, I want you to listen to me. I want you to take care of me. I don't understand what is going on, and I need your help. And that isn't necessarily where a lot of the technology conversations have been. It's not to say that agents don't do it. I think agents do it very, very well, certainly at scale, but it isn't necessarily facilitated by technology. Gaylord, why don't you jump in on that?
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind is that all the stuff we're talking about here isn't really unique to real estate. It's not even really unique to marketing per se. Like, we don't have to look very far to find someone talking about their significant other checking in on Foursquare while they're at a restaurant, or parents who are staring at their iPhones or their Androids while their children stare at iPhones and Androids, or walking down the street and seeing people staring at their phones instead of looking at the world that's around them. And that's like it's like an example of technology getting in between our experience of the everyday world and actually spending time with one another, like not even just in a businessy, clienty kind of way where we're attempting to generate this kind of efficiency, which is supposedly great for us, but might not be to a certain degree anyway. So it's not like this is totally like insane or unusual, right? Like, we've all seen this before, where someone is not paying enough attention to another real human being because they are instead it's like sending a text message to a person across the hall kind of thing. And that's I think that's like a bigger issue than just real estate. And I think that obviously in real estate people have to deal with it. And it sounds like the panelists that you guys have been hearing are saying things like this. So it's not like a real it's not like a real unique experience. It's just like if we just narrow in on the marketing aspect of it, we may like recognize like the symptom, but not see like what's the real underlying thing.
Right. Yeah, I think
right. And there's something I can add to this that was one of my big, really interesting takeaways from this here at Direct, from the East Coast one, which is I read a quote over the weekend that I thought was just so appropriate. It was somebody who said that social media is heavy on the media and really light on the social. He was referring to the phenomenon of people staring at their phones when they're sitting at dinner with a friend, right? What the interesting takeaway, it doesn't seem related initially, but I think if we think about it, it really does. The seller panel was asked the question of, how did you select an agent, right? And the question that was asked from the audience, I think it was the moderator that actually asked this, which was, okay, so help us out here, right? Because everybody in the audience are realtors. How can we best sort of market our services to you, right, so that you would at least give us a shot? And it's a legitimate question. These people, and by the way, here at Direct panelists were extraordinarily pro-realtor. I mean, they loved the realtors. They loved agents. So it wasn't anything like, they were just angry and pissed off the real estate agents. They actually loved, the realtors. They thought, they did a great job. So they get asked the question of, how should we then market ourselves to you? And the answer that just really stuck with me was this lady said, be part of the community, like sponsor a Little League team. Do you remember this, Matthew?
Yeah, and I think Gaylord was part of that conversation on the back channel.
Yeah. I was being a smart ass on the back channel, thinking that we should get a Call of Duty Coldwell Banker edition.
Oh, yeah.
I was being a smart ass. I think that what she was saying would make sense. I was just being a jerk.
But, what I was thinking about there, trying to relate to what you had just talked about, Gaylord, it seems to me maybe it's this. Look, this whole social media, all this technology, online, mobile, whatever you want to call it, right? From the consumer standpoint, since this is not their job, right, they, I think, may have gotten to maybe like a point of saturation where they just take it for granted, right? The technology is no longer much of a differentiator. It's not that big a deal anymore. And what they're all wanting, as Lindsay pointed out, is more of the connection, more of the human element. Because it is true, we did hear a lot of, almost every single panelist say things along the lines of, listen to me more. Or, the Gen Y, I thought were saying literally things like, I'm really good with the technology, but I'm not so good at talking to other people, so I want the agent to be my ambassador to the seller. Things like that.
That was very true, yeah.
And, right, and so maybe that's the next wave, right? As we go forward, if you are in the business, if you're a broker, if you're an agent, the technology stuff the consumers are going to just take as granted. I think they would be shocked. It would be exactly the same as if we said, well, I'm a realtor, but I don't have a phone. It would be the same level of, what are you talking about? Those are table stakes. And what they're then wanting is kind of like the woman said, be part of the community. Be a human being. Be somebody that, I can form a connection with. And maybe that's the most effective way of marketing. Right?
Well, what I'm thinking about is earlier in one of the other shows, I think, and I know I've heard Matthew talk about this before, that the experiences that we need to be creating or that we should aspire to aren't like, we're not looking for the best in our industry or the best in a particular thing. It's like it needs to be like your search needs to be as good as Google's search. Not as good as like the person across the street. And Matthew has said that in a more elegant way before, I know. And maybe technology is just another channel like that, right? And customer experience in terms of our physical face-to-face and how we interact with people is the same thing. And maybe it's like the way that we interact and pay attention to one another needs to be on par, not just with the other marketers and agents, because that may be what people are aspiring to or what maybe your panelists are responding to in terms of, hey, could you guys listen a little more? But it needs to be as good as, like, other people who pay attention and value them, like, in their lives, not just within a particular industry or this particular aspect of their life. And as a society or as our culture spends more time looking at screens and maybe less time than we would like paying attention to one another, maybe that really does become a really strong differentiator. And luckily, one that has a low barrier to entry, right? We don't have to buy any new technology to just listen to somebody.
Yeah, it's very true.
We can't fund a conference on the technology required to listen to people. I guess maybe it's the problem there.
That's very true. And one of the things that I need to add here is the price of not doing what you're talking about, Gaylord. Because, in podcasts past, if you like, we've talked about this idea of sort of excellence or obscurity and how there's, based on people's diminished attention span, there's actually fewer and fewer there's less and less time for people to actually even make those types of decisions. But the price of not paying attention, not listening, not serving up these magical experiences was actually something that came out of the conference, is that people, if they'd had a bad experience, and that bad experience could be something like they didn't get back to me within 10 minutes. It could be something as sort of quick, if you like, than that. It wasn't necessarily like I got totally kind of screwed over on the deal, or it wasn't something sort of that you would perceive to be sort of drastic, but like, okay, if they didn't get back to me within 10 minutes, I perceived that was a bad experience, and as a result, I would never use that brand again. It wasn't even agent specific.
Right.
It was like that particular experience clouded the entire perception of the brand. So
that makes sense.
It makes total sense, and it's not isolated to real estate either.
Right. I mean, the hand sword cuts both ways.
This is sort of how customer service and brand equity is built or destroyed. But the idea that there is very, very little brand differentiation in the mind of the consumer, we've spoken at great length about that kind of stuff, is if they call brokerage X and they don't get a great experience, they never work with brokerage X again. And one of the things that we started to talk about, certainly in one of the breaks there, was what we've talked about here before, is the role of the crappy agent in destroying the efforts of people that are actually providing the kind of amazing customer service that we're talking about. Those people that are actually using technology to create these relationships with their customers, to give them outstanding customer service, to totally sort of not only meet their needs but surpass their expectations. That kind of work, especially at scale, is completely eroded very, very quickly by one poor experience, and it was very unforgiving. That was sort of one of the things that I wrote down in my Evernote notes with this, is that the customer is more unforgiving when it comes to brand equity than ever before, and that, I think, to sort of talking it out here, that was what I was most uncomfortable with, is the ability to drive people away from your brand and away from your good agents is so easy, and it's such a fragile type of thing that can happen at a moment's notice, and it erodes the work of the good agents. And I think that is really terrifying. That's a very terrifying sort of customer insight, I think.
Well, I mean, this is going back to that infamous podcast, a few months ago, when I talked about civil war in real estate, right? But that's exactly right. And, that particular panelist, maintained it at the brand level. Whereas previous panelists, here directs, I mean, I've heard people say they won't use a real estate agent ever again. Right. Because they had one bad experience with an agent. So it wasn't just, it must have been just this agent from this brand. It was all real estate agents are all scumbags because they had one bad experience. I mean, you're exactly right. And I think that's actually one of the most pressing challenges at the organizational level, whether that's brokerage or association or whatever, to really think about that, one bad apple can actually ruin it for everybody. So, yeah, I mean,
it ties right into the way, like, the human brain works in terms of, like, how a group ideas together. And like that's why branding works, right? You remember a brand, and the problem for the industry is one of, okay, so they have a bad experience with that agent. They're going to forget that agent's name relatively quickly. I mean, they'll never work with them again, but who cares? They're going to remember the brand because the brand has done a great job of making their name memorable. And the real estate industry does a great job of making itself as an entity visible and memorable. Like that's the work. I mean, it's almost like to think about the terrifying aspect of someone in Matthew's position as a marketer for a brand, spending all day trying to make his brand memorable. That I could see how it will be terrifying that small mistakes can have very serious repercussions.
Well, no doubt. I mean, do you guys remember that Dominos, or was it Subway? It was some big fast food chain. I think it was Subway. And there's some video leaked out of some employee.
Domino's.
Was it Domino's? Like doing disgusting things to food. Like yep. Domino's corporate had to come out and do like massive damage control, right? Because people were not going to, just say, well, it's just that one employee. They were going to immediately jump to like all of Domino's can't be trusted, right? What's interesting about that entire phenomenon was, I think it was either somebody asked or I might have asked, I can't remember, but I didn't get the sense that the positive effect, was much, or rather, I got the sense the positive effect was much weaker. In other words, if they had a great experience with one agent, it didn't necessarily then translate to, I'm going to have a wonderful view and a great experience with every agent from that brand. Did you get that, Matthew? I did not. The negative totally works.
It definitely,
positive, harder.
I mean, this is sort of brand building 101 in general, really.
Yeah.
That to build the equity takes years, and it can be destroyed in a tweet.
Right.
And the fact that already skews really heavily on the negative side for the customer is somewhat a symptom of diminished attention all round. Right. Ironically, as fueled by technology and social media. But people have less time and less tolerance for that kind of stuff, and they make those decisions about brands faster than ever. And like I said, it's not just that it's one bad experience that clouds a brand. It can cloud an entire industry, and that level of sort of unforgiving is. I see it as one of the real estate industry's sort of biggest technology fueled challenges. This is nothing to do with your top 10 tips for Instagram or anything like that. This is like actual people not being able to get business because of what one person did, or the technology that you have in place to not be able to deal with this kind of stuff, right? And
this is one of the things.
Voicemail. Like technology can actually kind of solve some of this stuff in very, very positive ways. That doesn't perhaps require the sort of human factor, and perhaps the technology conversation should move towards that kind of stuff. Sorry, Lindsay, for cutting you off.
No, I just think that's why I think something like a Hero Direct is so important, because there is so much focus on some of these other types of, whether it's Pinterest or we've talked about these things ad nauseum, but here's at least this kind of creates a dialogue amongst agents where you're actually talking about these things. I don't know too many other platforms where people are having these kinds of discussions, so that's what I've loved about it. Rob, I know you have something that you wanted to add in here.
No, I mean, I think we are starting to run out of time. There's one thing that I kind of, it was a really positive day, right? Positive all around. Like I said, the panel, this was the most realtor-friendly group I've ever seen at any Hero Direct. There was a lot that we all got out of it, and this was the fourth one that I've attended, and still I got a lot out of it. But I'll tell you what, there's one thing that I feel like has to be said, which is, I'm not sure why, and as the MC of the event, I thanked everyone who attended. I understand it's a busy time. They took time out of their day to attend. They paid, money to attend to listen to consumers. But I got to tell you, the theater was maybe half full, maybe a quarter full. And just as an observer, and I'm trying not to be so biased because I understand this, like I'm the co-founder of this thing. I kind of wonder, what is it going to take for these types of events to be really into the mainstream? That the agents who showed up almost weren't the people that, that needed to hear these consumers. The agents who showed up were the ones that were already doing a really bang-up job anyway. What needs to happen for the majority of the industry, if you will, to start paying far more attention to things like this and far less attention to, the 10 things you can do with Pinterest crap that we get. And that's
Rob,
frustration I have.
Maybe the audience for this kind of event isn't agents. Maybe it's brokers.
Maybe.
I haven't been to one, so it's unfair of me to say one way or the other. But just based on some of the stuff I've heard you guys talk about, it seems to me that the advantage of understanding more about the consumer thought process, there's obviously advantage for agents to understand that, but there may be more like value to be derived from it at the broker level. Maybe it needs to be pitched at a broker, just in terms of what is an agent who attends an event like this going to do differently when they get home that they didn't already do? Because like you said, if the people who would actually pay money to come and do this, to listen to what random consumers have to say, they probably aren't the ones who need the message, right? And an agent isn't going to go tell their competition, whether they're in the same brokerage or not, because they're all competitors.
I don't know if I agree with that, though. I think that people that really care about the industry, that really care about the consumer experience, that really are passionate about being in this business, you work alongside these agents, and I don't know if it's necessarily such a competitive advantage that you want the people that you're working along. I mean, that's my take on it.
Okay. I don't know, so I'm with you on that. I'm willing to back off on that in a flash, because you have experience on that and I don't. So then the issue would be one of so it'd be brokers or agents who care enough about everybody else on their team that or maybe like a bunch of agents that say, hey, not all of us can go, but can you go and take notes for us? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it seems maybe something like that, Rob. Like maybe you're looking at for a different specific audience than just a general real estate agent. Like, what are they going to do differently when they get home?
Well, one of the things I don't disagree with you, Gaylord, that the mix of people is very, very important to consider with this thing. But one of the things that I was thinking about afterwards was the huge disconnect, as you rightly mentioned, the huge disconnect between what we heard this week and what we perceive to go on at real estate technology events. Whoever organizes it, whether it's an Inman or a NAR or a Retso or whatever, it doesn't really matter who it is. But the disconnect between the technology conversation and the customer conversation, in my mind, would benefit from actually blurring and, actually bundling together even a half day worth of actually listening to customers and the rest of the event talking about technology solutions predicated by what those customers actually told us. That might be more advantageous rather than here's 5 days of QR codes, augmented reality, social, mobile, paperless, whatever it is, vendor circus. And, if it almost sort of starts with the voice of the consumer and then becomes a scheduled series of events that can be referred to in the light of what those consumers said, the two things actually blur together for that particular audience, I think it's going to start to make more sense to them in terms of when this person was talking about I didn't understand what Zillow meant, then the technology that solves that is X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense? I know, Rob,
it makes perfect sense. And you know what? I actually think there's a lot of reason to hope that it will do something like because, Brad Inman was there, right? And he wasn't just there. He actually moderated the wrap-up to the Gen Y panel. And, I chatted with him briefly, and Laura Monroe was there, and some of the other Inman folks were there, and you know what? Who knows? Maybe we'll see something like this, as we go forward. And if so, I think it's a wonderful development because, like we kind of all said, the folks who really needed to hear this, who really needed to hear the voice of the consumer, were not necessarily the folks who had actually shown up to this.
They were not there, those people, no.
And maybe just as an industry, as a movement, some of the bigger organizations, some of the more influential, groups, some of the larger brokers, maybe they need to get behind this. I mean, at the same time, though, like I said, there's a lot of reason for hope because, Inman was there in force. We had the director of marketing for Corcoran there, right? This guy, Matthew Shadbolt, right? It's kind of a British guy.
I heard he presented. I heard he actually.
I know. He was on a panel and everything.
I was looking at the stream. Yeah. The most tweets and the most engaged content and greatest number of impressions came out when.
That's the best tweet of the event. The best tweet of the event.
Pretty much.
Gaylord.
but we had the director of marketing, Coldwell Banker, who was there. So. I think there's a lot of reason for positive hope. I'm just relaying to you guys, this, and it's I think the frustration we all kind of feel, and it's been a theme that's run throughout Trialogues from the very start, which is we feel in some ways like brokers and agents are being sold a bill of goods or sold a package of crap that's actually not going to help them. And the way to sort of transform that is exactly like you said. Maybe if we started with the customer, if we started with the consumer voice, and then talked about technology and tools and resources that could actually help bridge that gap and help deliver customer service, that's going to be a huge step forward. Maybe that is the next, evolution. Maybe that's the next generation of real estate technology.
It seems to me
I can only hope.
Round, Rob. It seems to me that it's the wrong way around, that it's the technology conversation first and then how it serves the customer, as opposed to technology serving the customer. It seems that it's the wrong way around. But what you're talking about is getting decision makers in the room, decision makers to actually hear those conversations, right?
No doubt. And I think it's going to happen. Like I said, you're a decision maker. David Marine's a decision maker, and it was great to see so many of the people in that room. Hopefully, it'll just be the start of something. The start of movement. That'll be nice.
Some of it's always like proof is in the pudding too, right? Like the other side, like. I definitely feel the frustration that you're describing in terms of, and even as a technology guy, I feel the frustration of sometimes there's way too much focus on technology and not enough on like the business. And but it's like even with all that, we could be wrong. People could be buying what they want to be buying, and we could be wrong. I don't think we are, and the data that I've looked at for the work that I do says that I'm not. But the possibility always exists that we could be wrong. And so it's worthwhile to have a little bit of humility and re-examine that to make sure that we're not. I don't think we are, like I said, but it's worth keeping that in mind. People buy what they want to buy, right? Like they go to the conferences and they listen to the people. People choose to listen to what they do. No one's forcing anybody to listen to anything. It's not that nobody knows that there are other ways of doing things, or maybe that's the problem you're alluding to.
I'm not sure I agree with that, Gaylord. I think that there is, from somebody who works inside a brokerage that fields these conversations with agents.
Yeah,
there is an unspoken pressure to keep up.
Right.
With technology, that is.
I don't think it's unspoken. I think it's spoken.
That is fueled. It's fueled by industry events.
Right.
If you're not doing this, you're somehow not serving the needs of the customer or not keeping up with your competition.
So then how do we send a message that inoculates? How do we inoculate people from that problem? And say, no,
I think by having conversations like this.
Yeah, I think you expose them more to the voice of the customer.
Yeah.
And I think that on that note, I think this is a great place to close because I think that really is the solution that we're all kind of talking about is having more of these conversations. And like Rob said, maybe there are some good reasons to hope that this kind of conversation is going to take front and center a lot more often. So it's been a great conversation, you guys, as it always is. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody in a week. Thanks so much, everyone.
See you.
Hopefully in a week. All right. Bye, guys.
It's the magic number. Somewhere in this hip-hop community.